Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told This podcast. I'm so glad you're here for another deep dive. This time we're tackling a figure whose life was a whirlwind of talent, controversy, and tragedy. Tupac Shakur.
What's incredible is that even decades after his death, his music and stories still resonate. Statues in Atlanta and Germany, lyrics quoted by everyone from politicians to your next-door neighbor, academic courses dedicated to his life. Why does Tupac still captivate us?
Exactly. It's like he tapped into something universal, something that transcends time and place. So today, we're going to dig into his childhood, his music, those legal troubles that seem to follow him everywhere, and of course, his untimely death.
What's fascinating is the contrast between the thug life persona and the depth of his artistry. He could spit fire on a track, but he was also writing poetry from a young age, even performing in the Nutcracker as a kid.
Wait, hold up. Tupac and the Nutcracker. That's not the image that usually comes to mind.
Right. It really challenges the one-dimensional view many people have. He was born Lassane Parish Crooks. But his name was later changed to Tupac Amaru Shakur after an Incan revolutionary.
Okay. That's a pretty strong statement right there. You can't get much more symbolic than naming your child after a revolutionary figure.
And it's almost like his life was destined to mirror that revolutionary spirit. His parents were active Black Panther Party members. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was even on trial as part of the Panther 21.
Wow. So he was exposed to activism and social justice from day one. That definitely explains the political themes in his early work.
Absolutely. But here's where things get even more interesting. Despite the turmoil of his parents' activism, they also enrolled him in the Baltimore School for the Arts. That's where he studied acting, ballet, all that. He even formed a close friendship with Jada Pinkett Smith there, a connection that lasted throughout his life.
So it wasn't all just street life and struggle. He had this whole other side, this artistic upbringing that most people don't know about.
And it really shaped him. Think about it. At 11 years old, he was writing poems about Black liberation, poems that were sent to imprisoned Black Panthers. That's pretty profound for a kid that age.
That's incredible. Do we know what kind of themes he explored in those early poems? Was it mostly anger, hope, or something else?
There is definitely anger at the injustice he saw around him, but also a yearning for change, a belief in the power of words to make a difference. You can see those seeds being planted in his early poetry, seeds that would later blossom in his music.
That's a great transition to talking about his music career. Where do we even begin? The man was prolific. From his early days with Digital Underground to those groundbreaking solo albums, he made a huge impact in a short amount of time.
His debut album, Tupacalypse Now, is a great place to start. It was raw, unapologetic, and packed with socially conscious lyrics that challenged everything from police brutality to poverty.
Didn't that album even catch the attention of then Vice President Dan Quayle? I remember hearing something about that.
You're right. Quayle publicly condemned the album, claiming it had no place in American society. Can you imagine a politician doing that today? It just fueled Tupac's fire and gave him even more credibility.
Talk about free publicity. It's almost like Quayle inadvertently helped launch Tupac's career into the stratosphere.
And from there, things just exploded. Albums like Strictly For My Niggaz and All Eyes on Me cemented his status as a hip-hop icon. But it's interesting to note the shift in his music.
You mean the move from politically charged lyrics to more hardcore gangsta rap? I've always wondered what drove that evolution.
There are a few theories. Some argue that his association with Death Row Records, a label known for its gangsta rap aesthetic, played a role. Others suggest it was a strategic move to appeal to a wider audience.
But maybe it was something deeper than that. I mean, he was facing increasing legal troubles, dealing with the pressures of fame. Maybe his music reflected the darker realities he was experiencing.
That's a good point. It's impossible to separate the art from the artist in Tupac's case. His life was so intertwined with his music, it's hard to tell which influenced the other more.
Before we dive deeper into the darker chapters of his life, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer volume of his work. We're talking double albums recorded in just a few days. The man was a creative force.
All Eyes on Me, for example, was the first double-length album in hip-hop history. And posthumously, he's one of only a handful of hip-hop artists with a diamond-certified album. That's 10 million copies sold.
Whoa, a diamond album. That's a testament to his lasting impact. And hey, while we're on the topic of impact, why don't you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any more mind-blowing deep dives on Tell Me More.
You won't want to miss the rest of this story. Tupac's life was a roller coaster, full of highs and lows, triumphs and tragedies, and trust me, there's still so much to uncover.
All right, now let's talk about the legal troubles that seemed to follow Tupac everywhere he went. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, that's for sure.
It's a complex story, and it's important to remember that we're dealing with real lives, real consequences. There were multiple arrests, prison time for assault and weapons charges, and of course, the very serious sexual assault case.
You mentioned he maintained his innocence throughout that trial. What are the arguments supporting his claim? And how do they hold up against the prosecution's case? It's a sensitive topic, but I think it's important to consider all sides of the story.
It's definitely a sensitive topic, and there are strong opinions on both sides. Tupac's supporters argue that the evidence was weak, that there were inconsistencies in the victim's testimony, and that he was targeted because of his fame and outspoken views.
Then what about the prosecution side? What evidence did they present to secure the conviction?
The prosecution relied heavily on the victim's testimony, as well as eyewitness accounts that placed Tupac at the scene of the alleged assault. They also pointed to his past legal troubles as evidence of a pattern of violent behavior.
It's a lot to unpack, and I don't think we can do it justice in just a few minutes, but I appreciate you laying out the different perspectives. It's a reminder that there's often more to the story than what meets the eye.
Exactly. And we can't forget the context of the time, the racial dynamics at play, and how young black men were often portrayed in the media. All of that contributed to the complexities of this case.
Now, we can't talk about Tupac's legal troubles without mentioning that infamous incident at Quad Studios in 1994.
The shooting where he was robbed and shot 5 times, that was a turning point for sure. It fueled his paranoia, intensified his feud with Biggie Smalls, and the whole East Coast-West Coast rivalry.
For those who aren't familiar with that rivalry, can you give us a little background on what sparked it and why it became so explosive?
Well, it wasn't just about music. It was about regional pride, cultural differences, and this sense of competition that was amplified by the media. You had these two powerful figures, Tupac representing the West Coast and Biggie the East Coast. And their feud became symbolic of a larger cultural clash.
And tragically, that clash ultimately led to violence and heartbreak, not just for Tupac and Biggie, but for the entire hip-hop community.
It really is a tragedy. And it's a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of the hip-hop world in the 90s.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the music and the glamour, but these were real people with real lives.
Yeah.
And the consequences were all too real.
Speaking of real consequences, there was another legal incident that really stood out to me, one that reveals a lot about Tupac's complex character.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. The jaywalking incident in Oakland.
That's the one. In 1991, Tupac was stopped by Oakland police for jaywalking. Something that seems pretty minor, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't think it would lead to anything major.
Well, according to Tupac, the officers used excessive force, choking him, throwing him to the ground, and slamming his head on the concrete. He claimed it was a case of police brutality and ended up suing the Oakland Police Department.
Wow, that escalated quickly. I can see how someone with his background, with his parents' experiences in the Black Panther Party, would be sensitive to any perceived abuse of power.
Exactly. It tapped into this deep-seated distrust of authority that he'd carried with him since childhood. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The case was settled for about $43,000, but later it was revealed that this incident might have been the onset of his alopecia.
Wait, you mean the condition that caused him to lose his hair? Are you saying that police brutality might have triggered an autoimmune disease?
It's a theory, and there's no definitive proof. But some medical experts believe the stress and trauma of that encounter could have played a role in triggering his alopecia.
That's mind-blowing. It adds a whole other layer to the seemingly minor incident. It shows how trauma can manifest in unexpected ways, and how even a seemingly small act of injustice can have lasting repercussions.
It's a powerful reminder that we need to be aware of the ripple effects of our actions, especially when it comes to issues of power and authority.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, there's another incident I wanted to ask you about. The tragic shooting of a 6-year-old boy in Marin City. I know there was a lot of controversy surrounding that case, and it's one that's often overlooked when discussing Tupac's life.
That's a heartbreaking story, and it's one that weighs heavily on Tupac's legacy. In 1992, after performing at a festival in Marin City, a conflict broke out while he was signing autographs. A gun was involved, a pistol registered to Tupac, and tragically, a 6-year-old boy riding his bike nearby was fatally shot.
Oh, that's just devastating. Was it ever determined who fired the weapon? Was Tupac directly involved?
It's still unclear. Accounts vary. But Tupac maintained that the gun accidentally discharged. His stepbrother was initially suspected of firing the weapon, but no charges were ever filed due to a lack of witnesses. However, the boy's mother filed a wrongful death suit against Tupac, which was eventually settled.
So even though he wasn't criminally charged, he still carried the weight of that tragedy.
Absolutely. Regardless of who actually pulled the trigger, the fact that a child lost his life in connection with one of his guns is a heavy burden to bear. It adds another layer of complexity to this already complicated figure.
Speaking of complexity, we've talked a lot about the thug life persona and the legal troubles, but there's also this whole other side to Tupac, the artist, the poet, the actor. Let's delve into that aspect of his life a bit more.
I'd love to. Tupac's artistry often gets overshadowed by the controversies, but it's essential to understanding his lasting impact. He wasn't just a rapper, he was a true wordsmith, a poet at heart. Remember those poems he wrote as a child?
The ones he sent to imprisoned Black Panthers. They were recently put up for sale, weren't they?
They were. And it sparked a lot of interest, both from collectors and scholars who recognized the significance of those early writings.
I wonder what kind of insights they offer into his development as an artist.
I'm sure there's a treasure trove of information there, waiting to be analyzed. And it's not just his childhood poetry that's noteworthy. Even while serving time in prison, Tupac continued to write, pouring his heart and soul into his lyrics.
You know, we haven't really talked about specific songs or lyrics yet. Are there any particular lines that stand out to you as exemplifying his talent or capturing his essence?
There are so many to choose from, but one that always resonates with me is from Keep Ya Head Up, a song that's both a tribute to Black women and a call for social change. He raps. And since we all came from a woman, got our name from a woman, and our game from a woman, I wonder why we take from our women, why we rape our women, do we hate our women? I think it's time to kill for our women, time to heal our women, be real to our women.
Wow. Those lyrics are so powerful, so raw and honest. You can feel the pain and the urgency in his voice.
It's a side of Tupac that often gets overlooked, his vulnerability, his empathy, his deep respect for women. It challenges the stereotype of the aggressive gangster rapper and reveals a more nuanced and complex individual.
And it's not just his music that showcases his artistic range. He also had a promising acting career, with roles in films like Juice and Poetic Justice.
He had a natural charisma and intensity on screen that captivated audiences. It's tragic that we lost him so young, as he had so much more to offer the world.
It's fascinating to think about the roles he could have played, the stories he could have told. I even heard a rumor that he was considered for a role in the Star Wars prequels.
Yes. Apparently, George Lucas was eyeing him to potentially play Mace Windu, the Jedi Master role that eventually went to Samuel L. Jackson. Can you imagine Tupac wielding a lightsaber?
That's wild. It would have been a whole different galaxy far, far away. But even without that role, his legacy continues to grow. There have been documentaries, biopics, even a Broadway play inspired by his life and work.
And his music continues to be streamed and enjoyed by millions around the world. It's like he's still speaking to us. Even though he's no longer physically present, his words, his music, his story, they all continue to inspire and provoke.
It's a testament to his enduring impact that even decades after his death, we're still talking about him, analyzing his work, and trying to understand the complexities of his life.
And that's what makes him such a fascinating figure. He was a walking contradiction, a revolutionary and a thug, a poet and a gangster, a lover and a fighter. He embodied the struggles and triumphs of his time, and his story continues to resonate with people from all walks of life.
It's amazing to think that even though he's been gone for nearly 3 decades, he still has this power to spark conversations and make us think about the world around us.
And his influence can be seen everywhere, from the murals and statues to the way other artists have sampled his music or been inspired by his style.
You know, one thing that always struck me about Tupac was his passion for poetry. It wasn't just about rapping for him. He was a wordsmith in the truest sense.
Absolutely. He was writing poetry long before he ever picked up a microphone, and even his lyrics have a poetic quality to them, a depth and complexity that sets him apart from many other rappers.
It makes you wonder what he could have accomplished if he'd had more time. Imagine the poems, the songs, the films he could have created.
It's a loss we still feel today, but even in his short life, he left behind a remarkable body of work. And there are organizations like the Tupac Shakur Foundation, dedicated to preserving his legacy and continuing his work of empowering young people through art.
That's inspiring to hear. It shows that his impact goes beyond entertainment. He was an activist, a voice for those who felt unheard.
And that voice continues to resonate today. His music still speaks to issues of social justice, inequality, and the struggles of marginalized communities.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Tupac Shakur, I think it's important to remember that he was a multifaceted individual full of contradictions and complexities.
He was a product of his environment, shaped by both the love he received and the hardships he faced. And his story, though tragically cut short, continues to inspire, provoke, and challenge us.
It reminds us that even amidst the fame and the controversy, there's a real person with dreams, vulnerabilities, and a deep desire to make a difference.
And that's a message that transcends time and place. It's a message that continues to resonate with each new generation that discovers Tupac's music and his story.
Well said. And to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on Tell Me More Stories Told Us podcast. We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive.